Welcome to Cybersecurity Sense, a weekly podcast providing updates and insight into the latest in cybersecurity. Brought to you by LBMC Information Security. Now, here's your host.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of LBMC Cybersecurity Sense. This is your host, William Parks, back again at it with another PCI episode with our two, I'm not going to say favorites again like I did last time, our two highly qualified professionals here, Andy Kerr and Kyle Hinterberg.
You might be talking about Kyle, not me.
Yeah, I love it. But today we're going to be back again with another PCI episode. We have some news. We have, I guess, the PCI summit kind of happened since the last time we chatted, so we can cover that stuff. And yeah, which requirement are you on today, guys?
I think we're up to requirement 6 this time.
Yeah, fun stuff.
Big day. But as per usual, we're going to start off with some news. So Kyle, we'll let you take the floor.
Sure thing. Yeah. We were, a number of the members of LBMC had a chance, earlier this month to go up to the PCI North American Community Meeting. And, that was out in Portland. Another one of our QSAs here, Brian and myself, had a chance to present on the main stage. So that was awesome. It was kind of the first time I ever had to go through the whole thing of makeup and getting mic'd up and all of that. And so, definitely kind of like a bucket list kind of item, I think, to do that. So that was awesome. And the rest of the meeting too was pretty good. I can't say there was a ton of takeaways, a ton of news that came out of it. Probably the most interesting thing that's going to be relevant to a lot of people is the council has said they're working on some tweaks and some updates to the version 4 of the DSS. And so they're going to be planning to release that here soon. It sounded like it's not going to be any game changers, really just some more, clarifications, fixing typos, things of that nature. But it'll still be interesting to see if there is anything that, modifies anything that we have been, thinking is going to come to pass with 4.0.
So it's all just kind of the same old, nothing crazy was announced.
Correct. Yeah. Nothing that's going to, again, make or break anyone's compliance. So as long as you're already planning for 4.0, you should be good. And if you're not planning, you're, going to be in a rush pretty soon here.
Yeah, you're going to be pushing it. You'll be pushing it. So I guess other than that, that's really all there is to update on for the news, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I don't know, Andy, if you've heard anything, but really in the world of PCI, that's about it.
Yeah, that was pretty much it.
Say, I'm sure everyone who's usually creating a whole lot of news is also busy preparing for PCI conference and getting all that stuff kind of figured out prior to that beforehand. But it sounds like it's a pretty benign conference this year. Just some more reminders that we've all heard and that, folks, I guess it doesn't hurt to hear again. But stepping aside from that topic, we have requirement 6 to talk about today. And so, as always, I'm the student. I'm here to learn and pop questions at random times. So I'll let you guys take it away.
Absolutely. One of the things that's, kind of changing with 4.0 for requirement 6 that I like is kind of they've almost in a sense, I feel like rebranded a little bit of changing the overall high level requirement to say that it's now to develop and maintain secure systems and software. And why I like that is historically, even myself, it's really felt like requirement 6 has just been focused on development, and it's kind of the, development requirement. If you don't do development, you don't have to worry so much about requirement 6. But a good portion of it is also on, vulnerability management, doing patching on your systems and things of that nature. And it is, both sides of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say too that probably one of the biggest things that's, and again, although we are talking about requirement 6, one of the big things that's coming out of 4.0 is actually, the changing of verbiage. So traditionally, the DSS has kind of had this, okay, we're talking about software development, and they've never really called out a lot of specifics. Now they're kind of utilizing the bespoke and custom software verbiage to kind of going forward in the 4.0. So that's going to be kind of a big change from what people have seen in the past, and can be sometimes a little bit confusing as to what those actually are.
I totally agree. And, on that, just for anyone who isn't as into it as Andy and I are, when they're talking about custom software, that's really talking about software that an organization is developing for itself. And then bespoke software is, essentially custom software, but that an organization is having a third party develop for them. So again, it's not off the shelf. It's not just like, any old software that anyone could go buy. It's custom for a specific organization, but it's being developed by that third party. And so now when you're reading through, requirement 6, you'll see that requirements say, this is for custom and bespoke. And in some cases, if you just have bespoke software, it's going to change it up a little bit because you yourself aren't doing that development and vice versa.
Yeah, and I want to keep this in mind for folks that when you're kind of going through your requirements, and I've had this come up a couple of different times, is if you are having an entity actually create your software for you. And whether that's say in your mobile application or your e-commerce, whatever that may be, it's always a good idea to try to find those companies that can provide you with an attestation of compliance, that they're meeting the software development guidelines for PCI. Otherwise, it's the same thing as it would be in any other instance where they're actually going to get drawn into the assessment itself. Again, it may not be that big a deal for some folks, but if you don't want to have to, pull one of your third-party software development companies into your assessment, then make sure that you find a good vendor that can produce an attestation of compliance.
That's a good point, Andy. I was actually about to ask that too, to see where that third-party vendor would fall into that whole thing.
Yeah,
and you took the words right out of my mouth there.
Another thing that's, can potentially come into play and help you is even, I haven't myself seen an organization have this in place yet, but even if you had a third party helping you with software and they didn't want to go to the full level of going through their own whole attestation and get their, AOC and all of that, this is a place too now where the new software security framework can come into play, and there's one of the versions of that, the secure SDLC, that can really help to show that how they're meeting requirement 6. And so that's a kind of a new and different option, not really 4.0 specific, but it is a way that organizations could approach that.
Okay, that's good to know. Good little software development life cycle there.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Probably jumping into the requirements, probably taking the words out of your mouth, Andy, but I was going to say that just like we've said on everything else, number one, roles and responsibilities, making sure that they are documented.
Yeah, I tell you, I think, and again, I know we've talked about this in several of the other requirements as well. It always comes down to who is the buck stopping with. Be able to define that role, and this also helps with assessments year after year, because if you're saying, hey, it's this specific role that's responsible for this requirement for requirement 6, okay, great, then we know exactly who to go to, and then we can just get this taken care of instead of you. And I'm sure there's tons of QSAs that have been on these calls where you get everybody in the room, you sit down, you're ready to get started, and you start asking questions, and all you hear is crickets. It's like, oh, well, that's not us. That's such and such and such and such. So, this always kind of eliminates that potential problem.
Absolutely. And I would say in general, just at a high level look of requirement 6, obviously those roles and responsibilities, but for anyone else that's, worried about it, I feel like this is one of the requirements that didn't actually have many significant changes. If you have been doing secure software, development, if you have been doing patching, if you have been doing change management appropriately, you're likely pretty good with 4.0 for requirement 6.
Yeah. And I will say that probably one of, and I wouldn't call it a big change, but it's much throughout all of the DSS, you always see, we need hardware, software inventory. We need inventory of this type of device and this and this and this. So requirement 6 has kind of taken that as well. So what you're going to find in one of the new requirements for 4.0 is 6.3.2. And this is specifically around having an inventory of the bespoke and custom software, as well as any kind of third-party software components that are incorporated into it. So this is going to be a little bit of a change from what we've seen in the past, but I think it's going to be important for merchants and service providers to have that and readily available. And this is going to be one of the things that we're going to be asking for up front. Hey, let's go ahead and see the inventory of all the software that's going to be in scope.
Yeah, and it's going to be important too to have a process to update that on, some type of a regular basis. I would recommend, really ideally do it at least quarterly, where you're going through all of that software and hardware, making sure that everything is compliant. If you have an operating system that's going to be hitting end of life in 6 months, those are things you need to know about sooner rather than later, so that way you can get on a plan to get it off your, environment before it becomes an issue. And so, have those inventories and keep them updated. It's one of those things that I almost find a little bit funny that in previous iterations of the DSS, those weren't as solidly required, and now they're coming out and saying, yeah, you really need to be doing this. You need to have processes in place for this, and it makes perfect sense.
And I know it seems like this is going to be, maybe it's going to be easy for some folks and maybe a little bit more challenging for others, but one of the pieces actually in the guidance itself that actually says, hey, look, this is not just like, hey, we're keeping up with this is our new version of software. It is critical that vulnerabilities in those kind of third-party pieces, and that's going to include any kind of, APIs, libraries, all those kinds of things. These are the things that really need to be inventoried well, because if some of those pieces are vulnerable to certain types of attacks, then hey, now you have an entire piece of software that's vulnerable. So this is going to be key to keeping up with those.
I do want to add something on there too. All the API and the libraries for a lot of the frameworks that developers use. I know within the past few months, especially the past few weeks, there are some libraries that a lot of supply chain and logistics companies actually use that have been getting attacked recently. And you can use a library in your software. That's not something that your developer necessarily. I'm not saying they don't understand it, but a lot of folks don't really go back and read the library to make sure nothing's changed or nothing malicious is in there. That's something where someone could push a piece of malicious firmware super easy and
absolutely.
have it replicated across several different companies super quick. That's why this is such a big thing, because it really can devastate if you aren't keeping track with what you have going on as far as library usage goes.
Absolutely.
And, kind of along with all of that, the thing that, organizations, I feel like sometimes go down the wrong path if they think their vulnerability management system or their vulnerability management program is running vulnerability scans. But really, vulnerability scans are a way to validate your vulnerability management processes. And so that's where requirement 6 is around vulnerability management. That's where you should be paying attention to all your inventories, looking at your systems, getting information about the third parties that you're doing business with, receiving alerts from any, software vendors or operating system suppliers that you're, making sure you're on those lists, getting in, when the government's releasing, alerts or things of notifications like that. You want to be doing that as your vulnerability management system so that you can be proactive and ahead of the game and not waiting for a vulnerability scan to tell you that you have a problem. And that's a place where a lot of people, kind of, in my opinion, tend to get that wrong, that they think their entire vulnerability management is based on scans, but those scans should really be verifications, not the actual program itself.
Yeah,
100%.
100%.
Be proactive, not reactive.
Well, and the other thing is too, that's actually a nice segue into our next little section here. I know that as far as vulnerability management and trying to address criticals and highs and security patches, it's always challenging, especially trying to risk rank those. And I've seen all different types of tools and manual processes to try to either rank what they're seeing as criticals and highs. Oh no, these are lows. These don't really affect us. These are false positives. But one of the new things that's kind of coming out this in 4.0 is actually how different merchants and service providers are tackling these kind of lower risk patches that kind of come up. So there, in the past, it's always been, well, there's been no really defined time frame, and PCI now has said, okay, this needs to be defined by the individual merchant or service provider, and they're gearing this now where these mediums and lows are, sometimes, and I feel like they're not really addressed as they should be, and Kyle, you can kind of tell me what your experience has been. They almost get put on the back burner But now in 6.3.3, these are called out specifically. Hey, these need to be, dealt with in the appropriate time frame. And I believe the last version I had seen, again, there's been some changes. They have to be. We will address these using a targeted risk analysis. So that was kind of the last, that I had seen. Kyle, do you know if there's been an update to that, or have they defined that a little bit more, or are they still leaving it up to the targeted risk analysis?
I think that's the case, of leaving it up, and so that way you kind of determine what your risk ranking is to make sure you do have a path forward for those. But I do, totally agree with you that all too often organizations entirely rely on, basically the CVSS score or whatever vulnerability ranking their scan tool or whatever it might be is providing them, and saying, oh yeah, all we worry about is the highs and the criticals, everything else we don't care about. But they're not,
Right.
One thing with that specifically is all organizations should not be just relying on those vulnerability criticalities. You should be looking at those, determining, is this really a high for us, or maybe this is behind 14 firewalls and it's really a low, and taking that into consideration, and vice versa. There's a lot of times where you might have a medium, but if it's exposed and public on the internet, that might be a critical. And so really looking at that for your organization to determine the criticality, and then making sure you take care of that. I know William on his side with the pen testing, I'm assuming there's many times where it might be a chain of 5, medium and low vulnerabilities, but you still get in. It's not like you just need that one critical to pop in an organization.
Oh, for sure. And that definitely does happen quite often. I think that the real key component to the pen test and what makes it so valuable is that we add that frame of reference, right? We're not just a computer that's saying, oh, there's a vulnerability here. This is, a critical, and it really isn't. For us, we understand the concept and the context in which vulnerabilities are being exploited. So if we can chain them together, then that's how we determine if it's critical or not. So that's why when you do these vulnerability scans, you have to go through and look and see what they're residing on, what the issues are residing on, and see, like Kyle said, how critical or uncritical, not critical, these things are. Because context is everything whenever it comes to this stuff.
It's kind of a different subject, but it's also the whole difference between, a vuln scan and a pen test, and where automated, pen testing generally is just actually automated vuln scanning. And if you don't have an actual, person in the loop who actually knows what they're doing, it's not going to be a pen test.
Right.
So, go ahead.
Oh no, you're good.
I was going to say, another place where there have been some changes for 4.0 coming up is around how you protect websites. And they now have a kind of a new term of payment pages, which is, really just what it sounds like. A payment page is the website where you're accepting payments. It's the place where someone is putting a credit card number in. And for those pages, you have to make sure that, you have some extra controls around them, which makes perfect sense. And one of them is that if you have any scripts running on them, you have to really make sure those scripts are authorized. You have an inventory, again, back to the idea of inventories. You have justifications for them. It's not like you're running Facebook pixels on them. You shouldn't be doing that sort of thing on your payment page. And you have to have a way to monitor their integrity, and that's kind of to Will's point earlier about third parties modifying stuff on you. If you have a third-party JavaScript library that you're pulling into your payment page, you have to have a way to make sure that third party isn't changing it without your knowledge, because if they all of a sudden get hacked and then they get in, malicious code injected into that library, now you're pulling it into your payment page. And so that's why some of these new requirements are coming into play to protect organizations from that type of a scenario.
Yeah, and there's actually there's been several tools that have kind of come out since 4.0 came out. This specific payment page script and to what Kyle was kind of discussing as far as the integrity and authorization and inventory that have addressed that. So there's been some that I've seen that essentially they all the scripts are loaded. On the page itself, it'll identify the scripts that are running on that specific page, and that includes like marketing scripts, Google scripts. I mean, all those scripts, anything that runs on that payment page has to be inventoried. And then what it essentially is setting up is a whitelisting of those scripts, and then it says, okay, only these scripts can run. That's it, nothing else. So it's able to do some hashing for the integrity component, and then obviously you have the authorization because you have it whitelisted. So there's some tools already out there that have been really, really interesting to kind of see to address this specific requirement. And it seems like this should be fairly simple if you have the right tool. Obviously, in a lot of cases, in some rare cases, you can have hundreds or some thousands of scripts that are running on your payment page. So it's not an easy manual task to do using some sort of content security policy or something that this is much easier if you have some sort of automated tool to help you with that.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And even at the community meeting, that was definitely one of the biggest marketing things I saw is many of the vendors that were there had, advertising about how they can help you with requirement 643 because they know that that's something where, to Andy's point, if you try to do that manually, it's not impossible, but you're going to have people that really know what they're doing. And so more than likely, most organizations are likely going to have to leverage, some type of a tool to help them with this one.
Absolutely.
Right.
And, another thing to think about with that is, my opinion is, to Andy's point, where you can have hundreds or even thousands of scripts, you really need to have a hard conversation with your marketing department or whoever else and just say, do we really need this on our payment pages? Yeah. You can have all those scripts everywhere else, have them on your landing pages or whatever, still obviously make sure they're secure. But when it comes to the page where a user is entering their credit card number, do you need to be tracking that? Do you need all that information that you might be grabbing? Try your best to minimize that, and it's going to reduce a lot of your headache. Again, that's where there's the requirement that there has to be, a justification for having that script, and it can't just be because we want to. You have to have some legitimate reason to have that script on that payment page where credit card data is being processed.
And not to jump too far ahead, but this is one requirement that is going to pair nicely with 11.6.1, that new kind of change and tamper detection mechanism that's going to go around the HTTP headers of the payment pages as well. So this is going to be one where you can kind of get your integrity checks and your payment script checks and everything all in one tool that I'm starting to see people kind of bundle together in one thing. So you're really going to see kind of these two requirements play off each other.
Absolutely. And that's, again, even back on the marketing side, I've seen lots of organizations, they say, yeah, we cover 643 and 1161. And it's because they're kind of, paired requirements. And if you're getting a tool that covers one, more than likely that tool is going to cover the other. And if it doesn't, you should be asking them why they don't, because they're kind of, go hand in hand.
And I think for the most part, as far as the new vulnerabilities, and I'm just kind of checking myself here, is as far as the new vulnerabilities in requirement 6, that's most of the changes. I think that's right.
That's the changes for requirement 6.
Yeah. And honestly, I think although it seems like that there's not a whole lot, these can be rather impactful depending on how mature your environment is. So I think that if you feel like you don't have a very mature environment, you're going to need some help and some guidance and direction with this. Then obviously LBMC is always available there to kind of help you through the gap assessment and offer some thoughts and ideas as far as how to tackle some of these. They can be a little overwhelming if it gets out of hand.
One other change I just thought about too is that historically, requirement 6 is one of the few requirements that had an either or. Requirement 6.6 had the option that either you had to have essentially a web application firewall or something similar technology, or you had to do at least annual web application vulnerability assessments, and you had to do those assessments then after significant changes. With 4.0 now, they're removing that option and just saying, hey, you need to have a WAF, basically, you need that 24/7 protection. So if you have been holding off on putting a WAF in front of your websites, or, it doesn't necessarily have to be a WAF, but essentially similar technology, now that's going to be required, and, PCI is going to kind of force that issue.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. Most people, when you're talking about that kind of protection out in front of your e-commerce environment, that's the first thing they think of. Well, we'll stick a WAF out there, but there is a way to do this without necessarily going through a WAF, like something, or even a service like Akamai. Because ultimately, what really needs to be in place is there has to be, you can configure some certain Cisco firewalls or Palo Alto firewalls hand in hand with IDS, IPS, and in some cases NetScaler. You take all these technologies together to essentially, hey, we need to log what's coming in. We need to make sure that these things are either being blocked or generating some sort of alert. So the combination of these different technologies can provide that overall solution. You just have to be able to make sure you're explaining that to your QSA, all these different components, or you can just throw a WAF in front of it and take care of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, usually the WAF is the easy out, and especially like if you're in AWS or something like that, or you use an Akamai, it's usually pretty easy just to flip that switch. But to your point, it's not absolutely required. There are other solutions that'll get you where you need to be.
Right. So I have one question, as per usual, a typical question. So do PCI DSS compliant service providers need to provide, like us, if I'm the company or the client, with compliance documentation?
The easy answer there is yes. And this is something that I know I run into with my merchant clients all the time, that they sometimes struggle asking their service providers to give them their attestation of compliance and responsibility documentation. And that's something we're now, thankfully, in 4.0, the council has more clearly defined that as service provider, requirements, saying they need to do this because they need to do that. That's the only way that merchant can validate what that service provider is doing to them. And I'm sure, Andy, you probably ran into the same thing, where sometimes it's just so hard, like pulling teeth, to get a service provider to give an attestation.
You're like, well, that's the thing is, you would think that, as far as a service provider, what you have to build out your responsibility matrix this should be a simple thing to do. But sometimes it's like, it's almost like, well, we didn't really do our assessment this year. Well, what do you mean we didn't do your assessment this year? You realize you're going to get pulled into this other assessment because of that, right? Oh, well, maybe we do have something like that. Hang on a second. Let me find you the right guy.
Something I know I absolutely love is the service providers that go the extra effort and they put their attestation and the responsibility, documentation just up publicly available on the internet. That's the whole point of an attestation of compliance, is should be really a public document. And, AWS is a great example. If you can go make a free account, log into their portal, download that attestation of compliance that shows you their, what services they have that are, PCI validated, showing what's covered there. And it also then they have their responsibility documentation showing what they are responsible for, what their customers are responsible for. So I feel like they're, and there's others that do it too, but they're a great example of way organizations should do that.
Absolutely.
Man, gentlemen, it's been a good conversation this morning. Oh my gosh. So key takeaways would be, I guess there's nothing really new.
Well, no, there's definitely new. I mean, so I would say key takeaways are the roles and responsibilities that have to be defined, just like all the other requirements. The big payment scripts, the inventory authorization and integrity, that's a huge one. That's critical. I think if I had to call out the biggest one, I would say that would be it. Out of requirement 6, that's going to be the most challenging, or with the right tool, make it easy. But I think that's going to be the one that people are going to be struggling with.
Yeah, I agree. It's the one where either you have to have the right team that can handle it, or you're going to have to be looking at purchasing a tool, to get in place prior to, 2025, when that's going to be a requirement.
Yeah, 100%.
Man, everything's about getting ready for 2025. 4.0 is going to come quick, everybody.
And as a caveat, guys,
into 23.
I think we said this last one, and I want to throw this out there one more time, folks. Next year, when 4.0 goes into effect, yes, that is absolutely 100% true. There's only a handful of requirements that you have to demonstrate at that time, where everything else is best practice. But that needs to be the time you need to start everything else as well. So, because basically in April of 2025, when we start going through these things, we're going to expect to see credentialed internal scans for 4 quarters. It's not, okay, now 2025, now we have to do credentialed internal vulnerability scans. No, that was supposed to start when 4.0 went into effect. You have to be able to show that in 2025. So all those things, that are out there, yes, you've got some time to kind of tweak in this, but you need to get started when 4.0 goes into effect.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great reminder, Andy. That's a really good reminder. Awesome. Well, thank you both, Kyle and Andy, for your time today. And requirement 6, kind of honestly on the list of bullet point things, one of the shorter ones, yet nonetheless one of the really, really important ones. So I mean, they're all super important. But yeah, thank you guys for your time. Thanks for your expertise, guys. Thank you so much for listening to LBMC Cybersecurity Sense. And this was what, September's episode.
Year's coming in, man. The end of the year's coming.
I know it's coming. It's coming soon. But we will see you guys on next month's episode. Take care.
All right. Thanks, everybody.